This one's going to be short and straightforward, unlike this monstrosity of a show. How old are the members of the Umbrella Academy by the time they kill themselves? All the siblings are born on the exact same day, 1st October 1989, and the first season of the show is set in 2019. As a result, aside from 5 and Klaus, will take all the characters to be 29 years and 6 months old by the end of the first season, as the first apocalypse happens on the 1st of April 2019.
April 2nd, 2019. Day after the apocalypse.
In the second season, Luther lands in Dallas, Texas on April 10th, 1962. This is based on a clipping that Elliot has on his board of his date of arrival. He leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which is on November 22nd, 1963. That would mean that by the end of the second season, Luther is 31 years, 1 month, and 12 days old. Luther then arrives in alternate 2019 on April 2nd.
April 2nd, 2019.
Based on my examination, the events of the third season seem to take place over the course of about 9 days. Luther does die and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season, but at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by this process, hence only the 9 days needs to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Luther is 31 years, 1 month, and 21 days old by the end of season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and since its date of arrival at the end of the previous season and the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed, I'm going to take the short its word and assume that it was exactly 6 years that had passed for his character. By tracking the story of certain characters, I was able to determine that the events of the final season seem to take place over the course of 5 days. Luther dies on the night of that 5th day. As a result, by the end of the series, Luther is approximately 37 years, 1 month, and 26 days old. Diego's math is going to be similar. The second season, he lands in Dallas, Texas on September 1st, 1963, and he leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which was on November 22nd, 1963, which would make him 29 years, 8 months, and 22 days old by the end of the second season. He spends some time at the commission in season 2, but since it only seems to be a couple of hours, he doesn't factor in that much to his overall age. Diego then arrives in alternate 2019 on April 2nd. The events of the third season seem to take place over the course of 9 days. Diego is erased from existence and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season, but at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by this process, so only the 9 days need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Diego is 29 years, 9 months, and 1 day old by the end of season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and since his date of arrival at the end of the previous season, and the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed, I'm going to take the show at its word and assume that it was exactly 6 years that had passed for his character. The events of the final season seem to take place over the course of 5 days. Diego dies on the night of that 5th day. As a result, by the end of the series, Diego is approximately 35 years, 9 months, and 6 days old. Allison's age is also going to have similar reasoning. She lands in Dallas, Texas on June 29th, 1961. This is based on a clipping that Elliot has on his board of her date of arrival. She leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which was on November 22nd, 1963. That would mean that by the end of the second season, Allison is 31 years, 10 months, and 23 days old. Allison then arrives in alternate 2019 on April 2nd. Based on my examination, the events of the third season seem to take place over the course of 9 days. Allison gets erased from existence and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season, but at no point is it stated that her age was altered in any manner by this process, hence only the 9 days need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Allison is 31 years, 11 months, and 1 day old by the end of season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and since her date of arrival at the end of the previous season and the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed, I'm going to take the show at its word and assume that it was exactly 6 years that had passed for her character. By tracking the story of certain characters like Klaus and Diego, I was able to determine that the events of the final season seem to take place over the course of about 5 days. Allison dies on the night of that 5th day. As a result, by the end of the series, Allison Hargreeves is approximately 37 years, 11 months, and 6 days old. Klaus is slightly different from the rest of his siblings when it comes to his age by the end of the first season. At one point, Klaus uses a briefcase to jump to the A Shau Valley in Vietnam in 1968. When he's questioned by Five about his trip, he claims that he spent 10 months there.
How long were you gone?
Almost a year. 10 months older now.
There's a continuity error, however, with this timeline. When Klaus meets Dave in the second season, he tells him that he died on February 21st, 1968.
February 21st, 1968, in the A Shau Valley. You take fire trying to hold Hill 689. You never come off that hill.
From the looks of it, Klaus returns to 2019 a few moments after Dave's death, so for him to have spent 10 months in the past, he would need to have arrived in 1967 instead of 1968. But it's literally shown that he arrived in 1968, so logically, he only spent about 2 months in 1968 before going back to 2019. Because this continuity error is the result of something that gets established later on, and because Klaus himself states how much time he spent in the past, I'm going to discard the error and just take Klaus at his word that he spent 10 months in the past. Based on that reasoning, Klaus would have to be 30 years and 4 months old by the end of the first season. From then on, however, the math to do with his age is similar to the rest of his siblings. He lands in Dallas, Texas on February 11th, 1960, and he leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which is on November 22nd, 1963. That would mean that by the end of the second season, Klaus is 34 years, 1 month, and 11 days old. Klaus then arrives in an alternate 2019 on April 2nd. Based on my examination, the events of the third season seem to take place over the course of 9 days. Klaus does get erased from existence, is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season. Plus, he also dies and comes back to life numerous times. However, at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by these experiences. Hence, only the 9 days need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Klaus was 34 years, 1 month and 20 days old by the end of Season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and once again, since his date of arrival at the end of the previous season and the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed, I'm going to take the show at its word and assume it was exactly 6 years that had passed for his character. By tracking the story of certain characters like him and Diego, I was able to determine that the events of the final season seemed to take place over the course of about 5 days. Klaus dies on the night of that 5th day. As a result, by the end of the series, Klaus is approximately 40 years, 1 month and 25 days old. 5 is also a special case when it comes to his age. 5 got trapped in a post-apocalyptic future at the age of 13 years, and he spent the majority of his life in that future, where he aged up significantly. At one point, 5 was recruited by the handler to work for the Commission. The original deal they made involved him working at the Commission for 5 years, but he reneged on that deal before he completed his 5-year service and chose to jump to 2019 on the date of his father's funeral. When he arrives in 2019, due to botching his jump, he is now an old man trapped in a child's body. When questioned on his age, he says that he spent 45 years in the post-apocalyptic future, and as a result, his consciousness is 58, but his body is now 13 again.
How long were you there?
45 years, give or take.
You're 58?
No, my consciousness is 58. Apparently my body is now 13 again.
Now, it's never clarified whether 5 gives that 45-year number or take into account the time he spent serving the Commission, but because he deliberately identifies himself as being mentally 58 years old, I'm going to assume that he took that time into account and factored it in as part of his age. Also, since he never clarifies his age down to the month, I'm only going to work with the years for now. 5 does spend some additional time at the Commission this season, but since the amount of time he was there seems to only be a couple of hours, it doesn't contribute much to his overall age. Given that, by 5's own admission, the events of the first season take place over the course of 8 days.
World ends in 8 days.
5's mental age would have to be 58 years and 8 days old, and his physical age would have to be 13 years and 8 days old by the end of the first season. In the second season, 5 lands in Dallas, Texas on November 25th, 1963. However, after witnessing the apocalypse a few seconds later, Hazel sends him back in time 10 days so he can attempt to stop that from happening. He leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which was on November 22nd, 1963. That would mean that 5 spent 8 days in 1963. So, by the end of the second season, 5 is mentally 58 years and 16 days old, physically 13 years and 16 days old. Once again, the time he spends killing the board of directors seems to only be a few minutes, so it doesn't contribute much to his overall age. 5 then arrives in alternate 2019 on April 2nd. Based on my examination, the events of the third season seem to take place over the course of 9 days. However, there are 2 points this season when 5 clarifies how many days he spent trying to stop the apocalypse. The first is when he meets the founder and states that he spent the past 20 days stopping apocalypses.
The last 20 days running around saving the world from apocalypses.
The second instance happens later in the 8th episode. When 5 is talking to his siblings, he says that most of them have spent the last 28 days trying to stop the world from ending.
Most of us have spent the last 28 days trying to stop the world from ending.
What this means is that the amount of time that has elapsed from the moment of 5's arrival in 2019 to now, from 5's perspective, is 28 days. He has spent 28 days running around trying to stop the end of the world. However, from my math, he's only spent 16 days doing this, which means that there's 12 days of unaccounted time that I'm unaware of. This is probably a continuity error, but once again, I'm going to take the character at his word and assume that all the 12 days I'm missing are all the moments he spent at the Commission. It's never fully confirmed how time passed at the Commission, so it's possible that the 12 days he spent there only seemed like a few hours somehow. Additionally, the amount of time that seems to pass for the siblings between episodes 8 and 10 is 2 days. Based on that, by discarding the previous 16 number and replacing it with 28 and then adding 2 days, we can determine that 5 is mentally 58 years and 30 days and physically 13 years and 30 days by the end of the third season. 5 does get erased from existence and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season, but at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by this process, hence only the 2 days need to be taken into consideration. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and in a meeting with the Keepers, 5 states that he's mentally 63 years old.
I don't look it, but I'm 63.
Since he doesn't clarify his age down to the month and day, I have to take him at his word and just go with him having a mental age of 63, a physical age of 19, and an unconfirmed age in terms of months and days. Later on, 5 and Lila get lost in a multiversal subway station, and when Diego confronts them about this, Lila says that they were trapped in there for 7 years.
Why
was searching for 7 years, Diego.
Once again, since no dates are shown and no exact months or days are given, I'm going to take the character at her word and add that 7 years onto Five's mental and physical age. Only a couple of hours pass after this, so by the end of the series, Five is approximately mentally 70 years and an unknown number of months and days old, and physically he is approximately 26 years and an unknown number of months and days old. Ben is also going to be slightly different to the majority of his siblings. Ben died during the Jennifer incident on October 14th, 2006, which would make him 17 years and 13 days old at the time of his death. Despite this, Klaus conjures Ben's spirit as a ghost shortly after his death, and Ben's spirit is with Klaus until he passes on November 22nd, 1963. Despite him being a ghost, Ben does seem to age along with Klaus, and based on his appearance, we can assume that Ben's spirit ages at the same rate as Klaus. Considering the fact that it's shown that Ben's spirit is always attached to Klaus and right by his side at nearly all times, I think it would be reasonable to assume that he was also with Klaus during the 10 months that he spent in the past in Vietnam. Adding that to his ghostly age and keeping all other factors the same as Klaus, we can conclude that Ben's spirit is similar to Klaus. He is 34 years, 1 month, and 11 days old at the time of his destruction. The alternate version of Ben, who I personally refer to as Darth Ben, was also born on the 12th hour of the first day of October in 1989. Since the events of Season 3 begin on April 2nd, 2019, he is presumably 29 years, 6 months, and 1 day old at the beginning of the season. From then on, the math is similar to most of the rest. Based on my examination, the events of the third season take place over the course of 9 days. Darth Ben does die and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the season, but at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by this process. Hence, only the 9 days need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Darth Ben is 29 years, 6 months, and 10 days old by the end of Season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and since his date of arrival at the end of the previous season, the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed. I'm going to take the show at its word and assume it was exactly 6 years that had passed for his character. By tracking the history of specific characters like him, Klaus, and Diego, I was able to determine that the events of the final season seem to take place over the course of about 5 days. Darth Ben dies on the night of that 5th day, and as a result, by the end of the series, Darth Ben is approximately 35 years, 6 months, and 15 days old. Viktor's math is once again similar to most of his siblings. In the second season, Vanya lands in Dallas, Texas on October 12, 1963. She leaves the 1960s on the night of the JFK assassination, which is on November 22nd, 1963. That would mean that by the end of the second season, Vanya is 29 years, 7 months, and 10 days old. Vanya then arrives in alternate 2019 on April 2nd. Based on my examination, the events of the third season seem to take place over the course of 9 days. Viktor does die and is brought back to life and given a physical body by the end of the third season, but at no point is it stated that his age was altered in any manner by this process. Hence, only the 9 days need to be taken into consideration. Therefore, Viktor is 29 years, 7 months, and 19 days by the end of Season 3. The fourth season begins with a 6-year time jump, and since his date of arrival at the end of the previous season and the exact date on which the events of this season start is not confirmed, I'm going to take the show at its word and assume it was exactly 6 years that had passed for his character. By tracking the story of specific characters like Klaus and Ben, I was able to determine that the events of the final season seem to take place over the course of about 5 days. Viktor dies on the night of that 5th day, and as a result, by the end of the series, Reginald Hargreeves is approximately 35 years, 7 months, and 24 days old. The last sibling we'll talk about is Lila. Lila was born on the exact same date as the rest of the siblings, but unlike them, her parents were murdered in 1993 by the handler, who then took her in and made her part of the commission. Lila spends a lot of time at the commission, so exact age is difficult to determine. Because of that, all I can do is go by her appearance, the 6-year time jump, and her 7-year stint with 5, and try to determine her age based on that. Lila looks to be around the same age as the siblings by the end of the third season, which would put her anywhere between 29 and 34 years old by that point. If we factored in the 6-year time jump and the 7-year trip with 5, that would mean that she has aged an additional 13 years by the time the show ended. With that in mind, Lila's age at the time of her death would have to be anywhere between 42 and 47 years old, plus undeterminable commission time. Reginald Hargreeves is an enigma when it comes to his entire character. The closest we get to determining how old he is when we're shown a flashback of him still being alive in 1918. Taking the final iteration of Reginald in the final season, who dies in the year 2025 based on the time jump, assuming he also had the capacity to live that long, we can conclude Reginald is over 107 years old at the time of his death. He is most likely significantly older than that based on his history as an alien, so we'll just say that he is 107 plus undeterminable alien age. We'll finish by looking at Pogo. The youngest we ever see him at is when he's brought in for experimentation by Grace and Reginald Hargreeves in 1962. Based on his appearance and the fact that chimpanzees seem to reach adulthood at around 10 to 13 years old, I'm going to assume he's about 2 to 5 years old at this point. The alternate version of Pogo dies in the Kugel bits, which takes place about 9 days after the Umbrella's arrival on April 2nd, 2019. If If we consider this Pogo to have the same childhood history as the Pogo that we received in 1962, then I think it's safe to assume that this Pogo is anywhere between 59 and 62 years old at the time of his death. The original Pogo would be around the same age, plus or minus a couple of months. Pogo living to this age is apparently not as out of the ordinary as I would have expected. Apparently, the average lifespan of wild chimpanzees can vary between 30 to 40 years, but the individual lifespans can vary considerably, with chimpanzees raised in captivity being able to live for 40 to 50 years. So Pogo is an old chimp, but not impossibly old. That's how old some of the major characters are by the end of the show. The oldest one was Reginald, followed by Five, followed by Pogo, followed by Lila, followed by Klaus, followed by Allison, followed by Luther, followed by Diego, followed by Viktor, and finalized by Ben. I tried to keep the years as accurate as possible based on the given information, but since exact dates are not provided in some of the cases, I had to do a bit of guesstimation and assumption here and there, as I'm sure you can tell. Let me know if you think there's any inaccuracies in my reasoning. You can check out my other 3 videos on the characters, plot, and world building of Umbrella Academy if you're curious about my thoughts on those things. Sorry for the audio and any editing mistakes, but it's all I can manage right now. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you want to help out my channel, and well, bye.